Hello, my lovely graveyard wanderers. Today I find myself in Bowdon, standing beside one of the most ancient parish churches in this region, St Mary's, a site with over 1,000 years of history. Records here stretch back to the Domesday Book of 1086. Think about that for a moment. When William the Conqueror's scribes were surveying England, this place was already significant. The church we see today is largely Victorian, rebuilt between 1858 and 1860 by W.H. Brackspear, but it retains whispers of much earlier centuries, including 16th century roofs and foundations that go back to the 12th century and beyond. Stones layered upon stone, faith layered upon faith. But today I did not enter the churchyard proper, and that might surprise you, because what detained me, what utterly captured me, was the old repositioned stones scattered around the church. Before I had even set foot among the main graves, I found myself caught in what can only be described as a veritable jigsaw of history. Fragments, displaced headstones, time-worn slabs propped near walls, stones gathered and reset, perhaps for preservation, perhaps during past landscaping, but each one a voice still speaking. Oh, and what voices they were. At first glance, you might imagine these stones are too worn, too fragmented to tell their stories. But if you take your time, and I mean truly take your time, they begin to reveal yourselves. My heart absolutely soared when I realised just how many 18th century stones there were here. Not one or two, but many, very many. The 1700s, that rich century of change, of Georgian refinement, of industry beginning to stir in the northwest, to stand among stones that have been weathering in Cheshire for over 250 years is something quite profound. These are not museum pieces, they're not curated exhibits, they're simply here. And then came the moment that made me almost giddy with delight. The 1600s. I began spotting dates from the 17th century. One, then another, and another. In total, I found around 10 stones bearing dates from the 1600s, many from the earlier part of that century. That is extraordinary survival. We're talking about memorials carved when James I was on the throne, when England was still reeling from plague outbreaks, when civil war loomed on the horizon. The earliest date I personally read, 1609. Just pause with that number. That stone was already standing here when Shakespeare was alive. It stood through the English Civil War. It stood through the Restoration, through the Georgian era, through the Industrial Revolution, through 2 world wars. And here we are reading it. I can't adequately describe the quiet thrill of tracing those numerals with my eyes. The long 1, the curled 6, the slightly uneven carving, the hand of a 17th century mason, still visible if you look carefully enough. Many of these early stones are modest in size, some heavily worn, the inscriptions softened by centuries of rain and lichen, but they endure. And what strikes me most about repositioned stones like these is their resilience. They've already survived one upheaval, lifted, moved, reset, and they've been disturbed, yet not discarded. And in that, there's something deeply symbolic. History here is not neat, It's not arranged in tidy chronological rows. It's layered, fragmented, pieced together, a true jigsaw. And as I moved slowly around the building, and I do mean slowly, I realised I'd been reading for a good couple of hours and I still had not ventured into the main churchyard. The light was beginning to soften, and you know what that means for me. I started glancing at the sky with mild anxiety because there's never enough daylight for gravestone hunting. Just as I was preparing to concede defeat to the fading afternoon, I spotted them. Small carvings, subtle but unmistakable, memento mori, and my heart leapt all over again. Skulls with crossed femurs, beautifully compact, but powerfully executed. Not grotesque, not theatrical, simply a clear, sober reminder, remember you must die. Alongside them, winged cherub faces, tender, almost watchful, symbols of the soul ascending heavenward. And then, to my utter delight, a couple of winged hourglasses. Winged hourglasses are among my favourite carvings, so poetic. Time flies, life is fleeting, the sand will run through, whether you're ready or not. To find these motifs here on the early stones felt like a final gift from the churchyard as I was about to leave. Because memento mori carvings on these stones are not merely decorative, they are theological statements. They reflect a period when mortality was a constant, intimate companion. Plague, childbirth, illness, death was never abstract, it was familiar. And the carvings are not purely bleak. The skull speaks of mortality, the wings of transcendence, the hourglass of time's passing. But the wings on that hourglass, they speak of hope beyond time. Standing there in the dimming light, surrounded by stones that have endured for 4 centuries, I felt that familiar mixture of melancholy and exhilaration that only graveyards can give me. These stones have been read before, by grieving families, by curious children, by parishioners walking past on a Sunday afternoon in 1703, in 1820, in 1910, and now by us. There's something incredibly humbling about that continuity. Before finally taking my leave, I couldn't possibly resist pausing beside the listed sundial. Of course I had to be photographed there. It would have been practically irresponsible not to. Sundials in churchyards are deeply symbolic. They mark time in the most literal way, dependent entirely upon light. No light, no time. And here I was, losing the light as I stood beside it. The dial itself was weathered, almost gone. It seemed entirely at home among these centuries of memorials. Time measured in shadows, lives measured in years, names measured in stone. I couldn't help but reflect how many of those 17th century parishioners had glanced at this very dial, how many timed their Sunday arrivals by its shadow. It felt like the perfect punctuation mark to my visit. I didn't need to explore every inch of the churchyard proper today. What I encountered around the church building itself was more than enough to fill my heart and my notebook. A jigsaw of history, 18th century abundance, 17th century survivors, an earliest date of 1609, memento mori carvings revealed just as daylight faded, and a sundial quietly reminding me that time, as always, moves on. But here, in places like this, time also lingers. It lingers in lichen, in softened lettering, in winged skulls and hourglasses, in stones that have already outlived the people they commemorate by 400 years. And as I left, I did so with that familiar sense of gratitude. Gratitude for survival, gratitude for craftsmanship, gratitude for the privilege of reading those names and dates aloud once more. Until next time, remember to look closely. Sometimes the greatest treasures are not the grand rows of a main churchyard, but quietly scattered around the edges, waiting patiently, history wanting to be pieced back together.